So today we're actually discussing alcohol and cancer risk, and specifically looking in depth at the US Surgeon General's advisory that was just published and released a few days ago. So this is actually pretty fresh. You might have already seen some news items around this because it's literally been everywhere. Now, this is what the 22-page report looks like that goes through the research and gives a strong warning about the link of alcohol with cancer. For those of us that may not know what this is, we need to understand its contents better because a Surgeon General's advisory published in the States is actually a public statement that calls people's attention to an urgent public health issue. And it provides recommendations for how it should be addressed. Advisories like this are actually reserved for significant public health challenges that require immediate awareness and action. So that's just how important this type of advisory is when they publish this. It's also good to know that this particular review specifically covers links to alcohol and cancer risk, but doesn't cover anything beyond that to other health issues related to cancer as well. And this is not the first time that there's been a warning like this coming out. In January 2023, now 2 years ago, a new Canadian guideline around alcohol came out and was published in this 89-page report called the Canada's Guidance on Alcohol and Health. Now, this report outlined new recommendations around alcohol, which really highlighted similar concerns for cancer risk, but also went beyond to cover things like its impact on heart disease, liver disease, and so much more. And this is one of the things that we had discussed around that time as well when it first came out in another call. We had also then changed the FTM program information to line up with the guidelines that came out that were a little bit more stringent based on the concerns around alcohol consumption and the risk to our health in general. So alcohol warnings have come out from multiple prominent and reputable organizations and agencies as well. So these agencies like the IARC, or International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is the specialized cancer agency of the World Health Organization, has classified alcohol as a group 1 carcinogen. This is alongside things like tobacco, asbestos, formaldehyde, among others. And this is actually the highest level of classification by the IARC for when there's enough evidence to conclude that it can cause cancer in humans. The AICR ranks the evidence linking alcohol and cancer as convincing, increases risk. Also, their highest ranking, the US National Toxicology Program, concluded in 2000 the alcoholic beverage consumption is known to be a human carcinogen. We see this also with the CDC and NCI, which also agree that alcohol causes at least 7 types of cancer. So there has been a lot of sort of conclusive information around this in the past, even where a lot of different organizations have come to this conclusion based on the research. What we know from this report and what this report actually starts with is this very important fact. Alcohol consumption is actually the 3rd leading preventable cause of cancer after tobacco and obesity. And this is something that then is controllable and something that we can do to decrease our impact as well. And alcohol is not only linked to one type of cancer, which I think a lot of people might really just correlate it with one specific one. Oftentimes, when I've had conversations with my patients, for example, they've just sort of said, well, I thought it was only linked to things like liver cancer. But it actually increases risk for at least 7 different types of cancers, including liver, but also things like breast cancer, in women specifically, colorectal cancer, esophageal cancer, mouth in terms of that oral cavity, throat, and the voice box as well. So there are different types of cancers where there is a very direct link in terms of that increase in risk. And when we look at how wide the impact of alcohol may be on cancer cases, what we know through this report is that over 740,000 cancer cases worldwide were attributable to alcohol consumption in 2020, with 185,100 cases reported or related to consumption of approximately 2 drinks or less per day. Meaning, this doesn't only impact heavy drinkers. In the US alone, they actually estimated in this particular report that over a 10-year time span, nearly 1 million preventable cancer cases are attributable to alcohol consumption. So alcohol actually has a big impact on our health globally. So, why this advisory and the Canadian report are important is that there is still a big disconnect between what we do and what we know. What we know is that alcohol use is very common, with about 72% of US adults reporting they consumed one or more drinks per week. As this graph shows, though, only 45% of people surveyed in 2019 were aware of the relationship between alcohol and cancer risk. People are more aware of the link between cancer and things like radiation, tobacco, asbestos, or even obesity than they are of the link with alcohol, meaning that there's still this huge gap in most people's understanding of this risk. Even as research has increased over nearly 2 decades, the awareness of alcohol as a cancer risk factor has not substantially improved during that time. And this is why this report was necessary to sort of align this with what the research is. So, for all of us, this is a really important question. How does alcohol actually cause cancer? What are the mechanisms by which it does this? Based on extensive research, there are at least four distinct ways alcohol can cause cancer. So it's not just one particular way that alcohol can potentially lead to cancerous processes. There are at least four that we know of. The first one that they highlight here is that alcohol actually breaks down into acetaldehyde in the body. Acetaldehyde is a metabolite that causes cancer by then binding to your DNA and damaging it. When DNA is damaged, that's always not a great thing, and a cell can begin to grow uncontrollably and create a cancerous tumor. So that's the first mechanism that we find out through this report. The second one that this report highlights is actually the way that alcohol can induce oxidative stress. So think of oxidative stress as rust in the car. And it does this by generating what they call reactive oxygen species, which then increases inflammation and then can damage DNA, proteins, lipids, and other things in the body through a process called oxidation. The best established evidence on how alcohol causes cancer is actually found in these first two pathways of that acetaldehyde formation that we just discussed, and this oxidative stress sort of inflammatory process as well. But we know there's two other ones that are highlighted in this report too. The third mechanism is based on alcohol's ability to alter or change the levels of multiple different hormones. So not only can it cause sort of changes and DNA damage, all of that type of stuff, it can also have a direct impact on hormones like estrogen. So one proposed mechanism for breast cancer specifically is that alcohol can increase estrogen, which then alters breast tissue, leading to DNA damage that can cause cancer, specifically breast cancer, and increase that breast cancer risk as well. The fourth and last mechanism highlighted in this particular report is that carcinogens from other sources, things like particles of tobacco smoke, for example, can actually dissolve in alcohol, making it easier for them to be absorbed into the body, increasing the risk for things like mouth and throat cancers. So, these last two mechanisms of alcohol's impact on hormones and alcohol as a solvent are actually widely agreed upon to be important pathways for cancer. They're not fully understood yet, but we know that this does happen. There's more research as always being done to see what other ways alcohol may cause cancer, including possibly the way it can deplete key nutrients like folic acid. And the higher risk for cancer linked to this type of deficiency, because when you have a folic acid deficiency, that can actually impact DNA damage and other things as well. So more research is needed, and it's coming to fully understand how alcohol can actually increase our cancer risk and how it can cause cancer in general. Now that we understand better how alcohol causes cancer, the question then becomes, how much alcohol does it take to actually increase your risk? And I've actually asked in the past many people sort of what they think that threshold might be. What we know is that the amount of alcohol a person drinks affects their risk of cancer, and that an important factor is actually the total amount of alcohol that one drinks or a person drinks consistently over time. So there is that. But what we also know is that oftentimes the amounts that we think may actually not necessarily be as high as what we need to cause or increase cancer risk. But before we look at the data, this part is also important. Understanding what a standard drink can be or is, as many of us might have different ideas of what one drink is. So, a standard drink is actually defined as something containing 14 grams of pure alcohol. That's equivalent to one bottle of beer, a bottle of cider, and that would be a 12-ounce for both of those with 5% alcohol, a glass of wine or a 5-ounce glass containing 12% alcohol, a shot glass of spirits as well. So we need to understand this because this will help us understand when they say sort of one drink or two drinks or however many drinks, how much that actually means. So in this particular diagram, it's really important for us to note a few things. What we do know is that in general, the more we drink, the higher the risk. So this seems pretty intuitive. But what's interesting is that even light drinking can actually increase risk. So oftentimes people in the past have only thought of cancer risks for heavy drinkers. But what we do find is that they found that women who even drank less than one drink per week, not per day, less than one drink a week, still had a 16.5% increased risk of cancer. This increased to 19% for those who drink one drink per day or 7 drinks a week, and to 21.8% for those that drink 2 drinks a day or 14 drinks per week. For certain cancers like breast, mouth, and throat cancers, evidence actually shows that this risk may start to increase around one or fewer drinks per day. And this is important to note because one of the myths we often hear again is that one drink a day is safe or cancer risks are only high for heavy drinkers. And unfortunately, that's not the case based on this data. The other important fact shown in the Canadian guidelines was that even 0 to 2 drinks per week were actually labeled as low risk and not no risk, because consuming any amount consistently can actually increase risk for cancers, whether it's a low amount, like even less than one per week, for example, or higher amounts. And obviously, with the higher amounts, we see higher risk factors as well. For breast cancer specifically, drinking less than one drink per week actually results in a 11.3% increased risk. One drink a day, the risk goes to 13.1%. And then 2 drinks a day, we see a higher increase of 15.3% as well. So just to give you an idea of just, that one drink a day and how much it can actually increase risk versus not drinking, mouth cancer's risk for drinking one drink a day increased by 40%. Drinking one drink a day for breast cancer risk actually was increased by 10%. So it can be pretty substantial in terms of even that one drink a day that oftentimes, people thought was actually safe to do. Alongside with the myth that light drinking is okay is a myth that wine is a healthier option or that other drinks might be healthier options. But that's actually not true. There is no safe kind as the risk is the alcohol content itself. So all types of alcohol, whether it's beer or wine or spirits, can actually increase cancer risk of at least 7 different types of cancers. Now, you may see some people who maybe drink more than others and just don't get cancer. I've had many patients in the past sort of say, my grandfather used to drink and smoke like a chimney and he never got cancer. He had other diseases maybe, but cancer wasn't one of them. And so why is this variation happening where some people seem to be okay with drinking some alcohol and others maybe it does increase their risk? And that's because cancer is actually multifaceted in terms of its causes. And an individual's risk or your risk for developing cancer, including alcohol related cancers, actually varies and is determined by many different things and a complex interaction of a few factors. So, things like your biological factors, for example, or genetics. One of the things around genetics is, for example, the Asian glow is what we used to call it. And something I get even with drinking 2 sips of wine, for example, and a big reason why I drink very rarely, maybe once a year at the most, if I do drink at all, because of just how uncomfortable it can get, is that we see this sort of genetic variant or in individuals of East Asian descent, where it can result in a flushing response after consuming alcohol that can be felt as like a really a lot of redness, a lot of heat in the cheeks, in the face, the neck, the whole body. And this genetic variant found in some East Asians actually reduces their ability to metabolize that acetaldehyde that we saw, which produces much higher risk for certain alcohol-related cancers. So if you do get that sort of what we used to call the Asian glow or this sort of redness potentially after drinking alcohol, this could be something that you're also lacking in terms of being able to break down that acetaldehyde properly. And again, for those people that experience this phenomenon, it could mean that your risk can be higher than for certain types of cancers related to alcohol. Environmental factors also are really clear and important. So exposures to other carcinogens, for example, or cancer-causing compounds. This is why we try to decrease our toxic exposures and go low tox, and even the products that we use on a daily basis, whether it's on your face or things like cleaners, for example, and why we go through that in our FTM program as well, because of how important it really is. Social and then economic factors are, healthy life patterns, for example, and lifestyle in general. All of those things can actually have a big impact in terms of how much of a risk drinking alcohol can be for you specifically versus someone else. So there is normally a lot at play here. So, in terms of this particular advisory, there are a few actions proposed, including around education and increased awareness for communities and individuals, as well as a reassessment of recommended limits. But another big one that I thought I'd share, because I know that a lot of us might see this in the future, especially, is an update to warning labels on alcoholic drinks, which would include a warning about the risk of cancer associated with alcohol consumption. That's sort of similar to what we see in cigarette smokes as well. There are currently 47 countries that require alcohol warning labels related to health and safety. And South Korea actually requires a cancer specific warning. Ireland, interestingly enough, will be requiring alcoholic drinks to have a cancer warning label starting in 2026 that states there is a direct link between alcohol and fatal cancers. This is a strong label and warning, but I think they're just trying to be very clear about what the research is saying with regards to alcohol and its impact on cancer risk as well. So I thought I'd share today some tips to help decrease the impact of alcohol, because I know that some of you might be having a drink or wanting a drink here and there, maybe on special occasions or other times. And so, what are some things that we can do to help decrease the impact of alcohol when we're having a drink? And also, what should we be considering on a regular basis? So, eating when you're drinking is actually really critical and important. So, before, during, and after, especially with lean meat and veggies, can actually help slow the absorption of alcohol into the body. And it gives your body that ability to then be able to metabolize the alcohol a little bit better and more slowly, and the impact of alcohol hitting you a little bit slower as well. Drinking slowly can also be helpful. The body has more time to again process that alcohol rather than downing it all in one. Just taking some sips, eating while you're drinking at the same time can all make an impact, or a better impact for alcohol. Hydration is really important. We know that it helps to prevent dehydration. It also helps to flush out toxins out of the body. And it can, again, then help to decrease that impact of alcohol as well. Being mindful of serving sizes, we took a look at what a serving size actually was and what a standard drink was, because again, there is some confusion around this. And so being mindful of what a serving size actually is can be really important as well. We know that there's actually some research around lemon juice and water specifically, having that the next morning after having some alcohol the night before, for example, or the day before, being helpful and potentially helping minimize sort of that alcohol-induced liver impact. And so that's really interesting. And we think it's related to the antioxidant potentials here found in lemon juice as well. We also see some data around green and black tea specifically, because they do have a lot of antioxidants in them. And really, if you think about it, any antioxidants can really be helpful in terms of decreasing some of that oxidative stress that we saw as one of the mechanisms that could potentially impact sort of the way that alcohol increases cancer risk, being important here to help minimize some of the alcohol impact. We're not saying that it can decrease and take it away altogether, but that this may be a way to try and decrease some of the impact of alcohol in the body and some of the ways in which it can then increase cancer risk as well. Again, this would be only when you're drinking it, rarely, every now and then type of thing. No more than 1 to 2 drinks at a time, also being important because the body can only metabolize a certain amount of alcohol at a time at one specific sitting, basically, and having non-drinking weeks. So it's really important right now. As I'm recording this, it's January. And so, dry January is a thing here where a lot of people are thinking about just not drinking any alcohol at all for the month. But again, we know that long-term quitting or long-term reduced drinking is actually associated with lower risk of some alcohol-related cancers. So not just the month per se, but looking at the entire year as an opportunity to decrease some of that, the alcohol intake as well. We know that the Canadian guideline, again, as a reminder, describes 0 to 2 drinks a week as low risk and something to aim for. And so that would be something that we would want to sort of continue on throughout the year as well. Trying de-alcoholized or non-alcoholic wine or beer or mocktails, for example, is another great way to reduce any impact that we might get from drinking alcoholic drinks. There are more de-alcoholized wine types coming out. I know that I've seen some in Longo's in our local store. I have not seen any in the LCBO, I don't believe. I think it's, very rare to find some in LCBO at this time, because I did actually do some research to try and include a few different ideas, but haven't really found any that I tried and I liked. A lot of them just sort of tasted like juice or didn't really have a good flavoring. And we sort of shared it with a few people to sort of try and get their feedback too. So I haven't been able to find one specific one that I could recommend, but there are multiple ones that are coming out for de-alcoholized wines. I know the Zares in our area also had few. We tried their PC brand. It wasn't that great. But what we see about de-alcoholized wine or non-alcoholic beer is that there could actually be potential benefits with those specific drinks without the damaging sort of impacts of alcohol. So actually, de-alcoholized wines actually have a ton of antioxidants in them. We know that non-alcoholic beers, according to some research, because of the hops in it, can actually potentially help people to wind down, and even for sleep type issues, that it could be helpful for that too. So there are some potential health benefits with these types of drinks that we don't see with the alcoholized versions, because again, it's the alcohol in the drinks themselves. Even if they do have, for wine, for example, some antioxidants and other things in there and nutrients found, you just don't get the beneficial impact of them because the alcohol just minimizes and decreases that or avoids that altogether. Whereas with the ones that don't have alcohol in them or a much reduced amount of alcohol can actually still have those beneficial impacts without worrying about sort of the damaging impacts of alcohol too. So I'm still on the hunt for a non-alcoholized or de-alcoholized wine to recommend to my patients and others. So if you know of any, please let me know as well. But I had not found one that I could say comfortably, I would try this one. So we're still on the hunt for that. It's still something that's up and coming. We do see a lot more, I think, non-alcoholic beers out there in the market now. But the wines are still something that I know from one of my patients is something that a lot of companies might want to focus on and have been focusing on more than they have in the past. So that's always something great for those of us who want a more healthier alternative as well. So I hope that's helpful for you. I hope that you're able to take some of those tips, especially when you're having a drink. It's a special occasion like your birthday or something, or maybe there's something else happening, to minimize some of the impact there as well. But we know that the best way that we can actually get rid of the impact of alcohol altogether is to try and have long-term quitting times or reduce drinking long-term. We know that that consistency is actually really important in terms of your habits, whether it's for alcohol or other sort of lifestyle habits as well, that can either reduce our risk for different types of cancers or increase them as well. So hopefully that's helpful.